Hello, I'm Jayne Adams. I'm the Charities Consultant here at Thomson Snell Passmore, and today we're going to have a think about why charities should consider becoming charitable incorporated organisations, which I'm going to refer to as CIOs. There's lots of advantages of becoming a CIO, which vastly outweigh any disadvantages, but for some charities it can be quite a complex process to go through, so we'll have a think about what some of the issues are. So a CIO is a corporate body, it's a corporate vehicle, but it's designed exclusively for charitable organisations registered in England and Wales. So only charities can become CIOs, and it's a special legal form that was designed and created expressly for charities. They are registered with and regulated by the Charity Commission for England and Wales, and they only exist as a matter of law once they are registered by the Charity Commission. The idea generated quite a few years ago, but it took quite a long time to come into fruition. So they were introduced in the Charities Act 2006, but actually the first CIOs were created in 2013. So they've been around for a few years now. So charity is a status, it's not in itself a legal structure. So that means all charities have to have their own type of legal structure, and there's a range of different options available. The most common ones that you'll come across are that of a charitable company, a charitable trust, or a charitable unincorporated association. So a CIO is a new type of legal structure, a new legal form to add to those in that list. Corporate charities, so a charitable company and a CIO, they have a separate legal personality in their own right. That means the charity itself is its own legal person. And that has lots of advantages. The first advantage is that means that the trustees of that charity have the protection of limited liability. The trustees of charities which are unincorporated, so for example a charitable trust or an unincorporated association, those trustees have what's called unlimited personal liability. Because the charity itself is not a legal person, it doesn't stand in the way of the trustees if there's any adverse consequences for the charity or action being taken against the charity. So for example, if someone sued an unincorporated charity, they're going to sue the trustees, which really nobody would want. If the charity has a corporate structure, a charitable company or a CIO, and somebody's going to sue, well, they'll sue the charity itself, which is obviously much preferable for the individual trustees. They are not personally liable for what's going to happen. Also, having a separate legal personality means that a charity can, in its own name, own assets and enter into contracts, for example. An unincorporated charity can't do that. It can only act through the names of its individual trustees. And that can be administratively difficult, tedious, and often very easily goes wrong. So being a charitable company avoids a lot of those kinds of issues because of the separate legal personality and the charity owning all the assets and entering into contracts, etc., in its own name. But a CIO can also do that. So why is there a CIO as well as a charitable company? Well, because charitable companies have to be registered with Companies House and regulated by Companies House, and they're subject to company law. But because they're charitable companies, they also have to be registered with the Charity Commission and subject to charity law. So they have a burden of dual regulation, which can be quite onerous and can add extra cost. A CIO was created specifically to bring the advantages of a separate legal personality, being a corporate body, but without the disadvantage of dual regulation. Because CIOs are not companies, they're not registered with Companies House and they're not regulated under company law. They are only registered with the Charity Commission and regulated under charity law. So a CIO gives you really the best of both worlds, the advantages of incorporated status, the separate legal personality, without the disadvantages of dual regulation. So by now you should be thinking that a CIO sounds great. So how does your charity become a CIO? Is it possible to convert to that structure? Yes, it is. It's a different process depending on your starting point. So depending on the type of legal structure you have at the moment, i.e. are you a charitable company looking to convert to a CIO, or are you an unincorporated charity, for example a charitable trust or an unincorporated association? Depending which you are at the moment, that will dictate how you convert to CIO status, and the process does vary. If an unincorporated charity decides it wants to convert to CIO status, we've got to work out, first of all, how is it going to do that? And that will depend on the existing governing document of the existing unincorporated charity. So we have a look at that first, and then from there we can work out the process. But essentially what's going to happen is we're going to create a new charity, that's the CIO. We're going to register that with the Charity Commission. That will give the new charity a new charity number, so you do need to be aware of that, because on conversion your charity number will change. There's things we can do to mitigate that, but you'll get a new charity number. And it may also be an opportunity if you want to give your charity a new name, if there's some other changes you want to make to your existing governing document, incorporating as a CIO would be a good moment to consider doing it. But essentially, as I say, we start by drafting a constitution for the new charity. That means choosing the type of model of CIO. There's two types. There's a foundation type and an association type. The association type is really better for membership organisations, so where you've got a membership that is separate from the trustee body, because the association type will give those members rights in a say of how the charity governance is run, and that may replicate best your existing charity structure if you're an unincorporated association, for example. The foundation model works much better for charities where there is no separate membership and it's really all about the trustees running the charity for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So we decide on which type of structure is best for you within those two models available to CIOs, and then we apply to register the CIO with the Charity Commission. Once all that's happened and the new CIO is in existence, you've then got a legal vehicle into which you can transfer the assets of the existing unincorporated charity. So essentially what you're doing is picking up the entirety, the whole undertaking of the existing unincorporated charity and transferring it into the new CIO. So there's quite a lot of complexity along the way in that process, depending on what assets your charity's got. Do you have staff? Do you have employees? Do you own land? Have you got investments? You probably have a fund of cash. What else have you got? Different types of assets have to be transferred according to different legal processes in order to ensure that they are correctly transferred to the new charity. So we work through all that process, looking at what you've got, how we need to transfer it, how do we get it legally into the new CIO that you've now created. You may find that we need to ask the Charity Commission for permission to deal with some elements of this process. That will add in to the overall timetable involved in incorporation if we do need to do that. So we'd look to identify that at quite an early stage and then take appropriate action. Once you've done that and you've got all your assets into the new CIO, what happens about the existing unincorporated charity? You can't just sort of leave it there. We've got to do something with it. So we think about what that is, because there are different options, but ultimately, whether it's shortly after the transfer of assets to the CIO or whether it's a little way further down the line, ultimately you'll probably look to wind up the existing unincorporated charity. That would then remove it from the Charities Commission's register, and you'd no longer be having to manage and administer that body. So I think you can see along the way it's quite a complex process. All charities always think they're terribly straightforward, and the reality is almost no charity is straightforward. They're all very individual. Everybody has different assets, different liabilities, different considerations to think about. Charities' governing documents vary widely, so it is important that you seek expert legal advice, and then together we can work through what are the issues for your particular charity, and we can make sure we effect the conversion to CIO status legally, correctly, safely. So charitable companies can also convert to CIO status. Now, for some types of charity, the structure of a charitable company is going to be the most appropriate one for them, even though you have got that slight downside of dual regulation by Companies House and the Charity Commission. So you want to take legal advice on that if you're considering converting to CIO status. Is it definitely the right thing for your charitable company? The answer may well be that it is, and in which case there is a defined process to go through in order to convert. It's a fairly simple process, but it starts with applying to the Charity Commission for permission to convert to that different CIO status. And essentially the application would consist of proving to the Charity Commission that the trustees want to do this. So you have to pass particular types of resolutions. They have to be worded in a particular way. You've also got to draft a constitution for the CIO. That'll be a similar process to that which we just talked about, choosing which type of model CIO is appropriate for you, whether a foundation model or an association model. You would draft that constitution, draft the necessary resolutions, and essentially apply to the Charity Commission for permission at that point. You would be able to keep the same charity name and charity number on conversion, so that's helpful. That makes life easier for you, the converting charity. You do need to think about also whether there's anything that needs tidying up before you apply to the Charity Commission. Never the best idea to put your head above the parapet with the regulator if your house isn't entirely in order. So check that your filings are all up to date. That's filings with the Companies House and with the Charity Commission. And also just go through that process of thinking about, is this an opportunity to make other changes that we think we'd like to make? Are you happy that your objects still work for you? Do you think they should be worded slightly differently? What about your winding up provisions in your governing document? Is there anything there that you might want to change? Don't change it for change's sake, but if there is something that you're finding increasingly difficult or unworkable for your charity to deal with, converting to a different type of legal status is a good opportunity to seek the Charity Commission's permission as appropriate to make those kinds of changes as well. Once you've successfully applied to the Charity Commission, they've given permission to convert. The Charity Commission will liaise with Companies House. Companies House will arrange for your existing company to be taken off the register of companies, and you will then deal as necessary with any other bodies. For example, the land registry. If your charity owns land, you will need to change the details with the land registry for how that land is owned, because instead of being owned by the charitable company, on conversion it's going to start being owned by the CIO. So you would need to go through a process with the land registry to make sure they're aware of that. But otherwise, it's a relatively straightforward process for those charitable companies for whom conversion to CIO status is the right thing to do. But do take advice as to whether that applies to your charitable company. I completely understand that everything I've said today sounds quite daunting. I've used the word complex. It can be a challenging process. It can be quite a time-consuming process. Whichever route you're following, it's probably going to take a number of months to do this, so that can be off-putting. Immediately a lawyer uses words like complex, you'll be thinking that sounds expensive. It can be costly in legal fees, that's right, because it's a big process. You're setting up a new charity, essentially, and as we've said, you're transferring the entirety of an existing charity into that new charity. So there's a lot of work involved in that, even for quite straightforward smaller charities. However, the thing to remember, these are one-off costs. Once you've done this, you've done it, and you've gained all the advantages of doing it, particularly if your structure is that of an unincorporated charity becoming an incorporated one, and you've got the benefit of limited liability for your trustees and all the other benefits we've talked about of being a legal personality. So on a cost-benefit analysis, although you might say, I would say this, wouldn't I? It's a good thing to do, and these are one-off costs and a one-off time commitment. Do have a think about it. If you'd like to talk to us further about it, we are advising charities in exactly your situation on a very regular basis. We get a lot of inquiries about charities looking to convert to CIO status. They are quite right to be thinking about that, so you would not be an outlier in considering that as to whether it's a good option for your charity. If you'd like to have a chat about it, do please come and talk to us.